Okay. So girls, I'm going to make a couple of recordings. This application that I have only lets me record 15 minutes at a time. So, and that's fine because nobody, after 15 minutes, people sort of lose interest anyway. So this allows me to just give you little clips and we'll go through the chapter and we're going to do chapter 12 and chapter 13. So it'll probably take a couple of recordings because it's only 15 minutes. You're going to do the focus questions for chapter 12, chapter 13, the open book quizzes that we always do, and I think I'm going to do a short answer too. And that will bring us up so when we come back, we can just go right into chapter 14, which will be, I'm not sure if that's the Civil War, the next chapter is, but we'll be closer to it. And you'll see that these two chapters, this chapter is also very redundant. We already mentioned the Age of Reform. This actually just goes into more detail. We talked about how after the Second Great Awakening, people come out of it with a heightened sense of morals, and they do start to question the ills of society. So this kind of just digs deeper into that. And the women's movement starts, the abolitionist movement starts. So this is just a quilt. I think I mentioned in one class, like even women used to make quilts that had a lot of symbolic meaning, and even slaves used to make quilts that had like secret messages that their masters didn't know, but they were actually giving signals about the Underground Railroad and messages to each other of when it was a good night to run, or if they were planning some kind of a meeting or a slave uprising or something like that. But that this one is not that. This is a women's rights quilt, but a lot of times this was something that women did, so they made it more meaningful by putting in symbols of equality. Okay. All right, so some of the things that we've already talked about come up here again in the post, what are the years here? Yeah, 1820 to 1840. So that's also inclusive of the Great Awakening time period. So I feel like we keep covering the same time period, but in different aspects. It's not very chronological like it is. I mean, we're still in the same time period, but each chapter, it's not like we're progressing in time so much as we're jumping from one topic within that time period to another. So again, slavery is always in the forefront in this antebellum period. But also this chapter is going to focus a little bit more on other social issues that were going on. Okay, so what are the major movements? And you guys already know this. And in fact, in Canvas, there's a graphic organizer that has all of the reform movements and the key players. So, education, asylum, prison reform, the women's movement, abolition, temperance, all of that stuff comes up. On top of that, because people are thinking differently, there is also a push for a lot of utopian communities to come about. And I'm sure you guys know what a utopia and a dystopia are from English class, but a utopian society is a society in which people hope to create like a paradise. And frankly, girls, there is no utopian society that really has ever worked. The Shakers are still around. We will talk about them. But really, no utopian society has ever become super successful because you can't live totally disconnected from the rest of the world. And that's what a lot of them try and do. They try to exist just without being dependent upon the outside world and do their own thing. And some of them that can create a way to make a living successfully without really having to deal with the outside world too much will be able to create a bit of a community. But some of them end up being a little bit like cult-like, and or like, it's a group that you get in, you can never get out. I mean, I'm sure we've seen stuff like this on the news, but in the 1800s, this became a very popular idea because of the Great Awakening, because people were thinking differently and looking for that utopia, looking for that perfect place where you could exist within your own rules and do things your own way. Think of transcendentalism too. Transcendentalism also contributed to a lot of utopian societies forming because remember, it's that like sixth sense that you're experiencing something on a level that's not, feel, touch, smell, sight, whatever, taste. It's transcending your spirit. It's a very spiritual connection. So people were kind of out there thinking differently and trying, experimenting, with different philosophies and different ways of thinking. So a lot of these utopian communities came up as a result of that. And probably the most successful is the Shakers. They are, if you Google it, you can look up, there's some videos about the Shakers. They're in Maine today. There's maybe like 4 or 5 of them left, individual people. And they're successful because they actually make really nice, if you ask your moms or your grandmoms, they probably have heard of Shaker style furniture. They do make a style of furniture that's very simplistic and sturdy, and they make baskets, and they would farm, and they would go out and sell things to the community. So they're very industrious, and very hardworking, and their whole thing is like hands to God. They, before they even think about praying, they're very religious. They think about working and what can they do to give back. So if you're like that, you're going to have some success. But they also believe, they did not believe, if you look at this picture, that men and women should be separate. They believed in abstinence. So they didn't even think men and women should date, let alone get married and procreate. So if you're not going to, have families, you're not going to pass down the tradition, you're not going to have any children. So the only way they could get more members is to sort of recruit them. So they did for a long time. They were very popular. They were actually founded by a woman who came over from Britain named Mother Ann. And Mother Ann was very successful. They recruited a ton of people. They had all these people. But as people became more materialistic over the years, nobody really wanted to live that simplistic lifestyle. And eventually they did die off. But the reason they were called the Shakers was because of the way they did this little dance that they did. Kind of like the Quakers were called the Quakers because they would quake when they prayed. They would pray so hard they would quake. The Shakers actually would sometimes shake and do some kind of shaking move when they were praying. Anyway, so they eventually, I said, they're still around today, but very, very small community. But all the others were destructive, and fell apart. Another one that was somewhat successful was the Oneida. And again, if you ask your moms or your grandmoms, Oneida is a type of flatware or silverware. Most people, the brand of silverware they have is Oneida, named after the Oneida Indians because they're up in that region, which is like upstate New York. And the Oneida were founded by a guy named John Humphrey Noyes, who also, he was sort of, you know, forward thinking, and he kind of had the opposite view, where the Shakers felt like you will not have sexual relations with men and women. He believed in like what he called a complex marriage, where it was sort of open, and your relationships did not have to be exclusive, even if you were married. So he believed in that, and he came up with he faced some scrutiny because it was really more so for men to be with multiple women and not so much the other way around. So it seemed a little bit unfair to the women. So he got caught some slack for that. And then he also believed in people, like the two best looking people, the two smartest people, the people with the best attributes getting together and having children, which is a form of what we call eugenics, which is like engineering the perfect human, which is frowned upon. So, I mean, by some people maybe are for it, but it is scrutinized, that you're trying to create some kind of a perfect human, and that is not accepted by a lot of people. Okay. But again, they were industrious, and they made silverware, and actually they also made animal traps out of steel as well. And they were able to sustain themselves. That's the key. But eventually they do go defunct. Okay. So here's where a lot of them were, and a lot of them, girls, this region here is where like Western New York, Ohio, like upper western corner of Pennsylvania. This region is called the burned over district because, especially up here in New York, Western New York, that's where a lot of the preaching in the Second Great Awakening took place. So the most fervent preachers, the most evangelical preaching, all that stuff really was at a fever pitch in this area here. So they called it the burned over district because they said the fiery sermons were so fiery that the whole area was burned over. So that's where you're going to see a lot of these utopian societies, because they're hearing these sermons, they're in the midst of the second great awakening, and they're thinking, how can I change things? Like, think about Mormonism. Mormonism was born, John Smith, he eventually goes to Illinois, but he was originally from New York, upstate New York. And this is where he heard, he said the angel came to him and all this. So people were open-minded and thinking in a different way, which is what led to some of these utopian societies forming. Okay. And these ones weren't as influential as, I would say, the most influential were the Oneida and the Shakers. The Owenites followed a man named Robert Owen, okay, and he had a place called New Harmony, and that also fell apart. But it does influence a lot of other reform in education and things like that. Okay, so secular meaning these ones weren't maybe as religious. So I would say the Shakers are religious for sure, and some of the other ones are more secular, meaning not having to do, or worldly, not having to do with a church affiliation. Okay, even though it started with the Second Great Awakening, it just got people thinking differently. It doesn't mean they all have to be religious. Okay, The Crisis was just his magazine. Okay. I already said this, the burned over district, upstate New York and northern Ohio. And this also leads to a temperance movement, the Second Great Awakening. I talked about that. And this is just the progression of drunkenness, right? If you start drinking, you're going to eventually, lose your job, your house, your wife, everything. Okay. All right. And then this is also for temperance. So here this guy is, he's got this, pure, lovely wife, love, purity, and fidelity. And then he's tempted over here by drink, which is the not good side. Okay, he's torn between a woman in white who illustrates purity and the temptress who offers him liquor. So it's showing liquor in a bad light. Whoa. Okay, so here's the thing too, girls. This is also the time period when the immigrants are pouring in from Ireland and Germany. The Irish and the Germans like to drink. Europeans, to them, drinking is normal. They do some of them overdo it? Sure. It's like today. If you go to Europe today, the drinking age isn't the same as it is here. People don't make such a big deal about people underage drinking. They grow up drinking wine at the table with their parents or something like that. So Europeans come over here and they're taken aback by it. They don't like temperance. And a lot of Americans see it as an assault on freedom. Like I told you guys before, it's very hard to temper people's moral. Not even to temper. It's hard to make laws to control people's morality. Like, what one person can drink and what another person can drink and handle it are two different things. You can't place laws to govern how much somebody can or cannot drink. And we learned with prohibition that it didn't work. So, it's like I said, kind of like the pandemic. We're saying, don't do this, don't go socialize, don't have gatherings bigger than 10. Some people are going to listen and follow it, and some people aren't. And some, it's just the way it is. People have their own judgment. So they learned that with, prohibition. So the temperance movement picks up steam, and by 1919 it does get passed and it becomes prohibition, but it eventually has to be repealed. Okay, so pretty soon we're going to run out of time. This is a German beer garden, and I'm going to stop and I have to start another one. And then we did talk about, I won't go over this again, with Dorothea Dix and the asylums, and the changing of schools with Horace Mann, pushing for education reform. Okay, so we're going to stop here and then I'll pick it up and finish it with a second recording.